And then there were 3. Unpacking the data from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine on this episode of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog. Welcome to Shareable Science. Science you can share. This week, the FDA gave emergency use authorization to the COVID vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson. So that's vaccine number 3 approved for use in the United States. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is different than the vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer. It actually uses an adenovirus to carry the genetic information that provides immunity against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So we're actually using an adenovirus that generally causes common cold as a carrier vehicle to get the genetic instructions that we want to provide immunity. So this specific adenovirus is called Ad26 or adenovirus 26, and it's been modified in 2 important ways. Number 1, it's been modified so that it can infect cells and get its genetic cargo into cells, but it can't reproduce and make more virus. And then number 2, it's been adjusted so that it's actually carrying a DNA piece of instructions that tells the cell how to make the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. So that's its genetic cargo. And here's how it works. So the modified adenovirus binds to cells and is incorporated in. It's brought into the cell, and then it's taken to the nucleus. And in the nucleus, it actually delivers its genetic cargo, the spike protein gene. And once that piece of DNA is inside the nucleus, it is read just like any other piece of genetic instruction inside a cell. So the cell reads that piece of information, it makes a copy of it as RNA, it leaves the nucleus, and then it is translated into protein. So in a nutshell, the genetic code is read by the cell, and then we ultimately end up making the spike protein. That spike protein then sits on the outside of vaccinated cells, and that's a key red flag to the immune system that there is something atypical here, and that is then what the immune system homes in on and then builds its own immune response against. So that's the way it works. What's the data showing how effective it is? So as I said, the FDA gave emergency use authorization for this vaccine for all individuals 18 and above. Over the next several months, they'll begin clinical trials looking at its efficacy in children and in adolescents. So we'll have to wait for that data. This is a one-and-done vaccine, 1 shot, 1 dose. And it doesn't have to be kept frozen. It's much hardier than the mRNA vaccines that we've seen up until this point. These 2 factors, 1 dose, doesn't have to have special storage conditions, means it will be the accessible vaccine for large swaths of America and large swaths of the world. The phase 3 clinical trial took place this fall. 44,000 individuals were enrolled, split roughly in half into the people that got the vaccine and the people that got a placebo. And nobody knew up front who got what. So let's look at the efficacy data. And I should say this vaccine, this clinical trial took place in 8 different countries around the world, the United States being one of them. I'm going to start by just talking about the data from the trial participants in the United States. So we're going to start with this term efficacy, and you can see 72% efficacy in the United States against symptomatic COVID. Now, when people hear efficacy and see a number like 72% efficacy, sometimes they think, oh, 72% effective, that means that 28% of the people that got the vaccine ended up getting COVID-19. That's not the way this works. Efficacy is a measure of how much the vaccine lowers the risk of developing, in this case, symptomatic COVID compared to the placebo. So having the vaccine lowers the risk of developing symptoms by 72%. And if you actually look at severe COVID, the kind that could land you in the hospital, that efficacy is even higher in the United States, 86%. This vaccine does what it is meant to do. It keeps people from getting really ill and finding themselves hospitalized and on a ventilator. There are slightly lower efficacy results in South Africa, which is not necessarily surprising because during the time of this clinical trial, The variant that was first identified in South Africa was rampant in this population. And we know that that variant has a set of genetic mutations that allow it to partially evade the immunity developed by the vaccine. Not a significant drop, down into the 60s or instead of the 70s. So it's still useful, but it's slightly less useful in that population. We also have some early data that it appears not only to prevent individuals from getting ill, but also to prevent them from getting infected and transmitting it. And we talked about that in our last episode, so I'll refer you back to that for more details. In terms of side effects, the side effects are generally mild. You can see them here. Injection pain, pain at the site of the injection, headache, muscle aches, fatigue, but they're relatively mild. They're actually less mild than what we're seeing with the mRNA vaccines. An important point that I missed that I should have said, the clinical trial enrolled people from all different ages and different ethnic groups, and that high efficacy was found across the board. So this is a vaccine that works in all different populations. Now, last point. There were some initial concerns when this vaccine was early in development that using an adenovirus as a carrier might cause problems with immunity. In other words, people might develop immunity to the adenovirus carrier and not the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein cargo that it was carrying. There was another concern that if you had recently been infected with this same adenovirus, maybe you already had immunity to the adenovirus and the vaccine couldn't do its job because your body would quickly destroy it looking for the virus, the adenovirus. The data from the clinical trials don't bear out either of those concerns. This is a vaccine that produces a robust immune response against SARS-CoV-2. Now, I've got a reference down here if you'd like to look at it from the New York Times that goes into more of the detail about the whole issue around efficacy and what is efficacy measuring and how do we interpret what that means. You might want to check that out. So I'm excited about this vaccine. It is another one to add to the arsenal. Please share this with people that you think might also want to know more about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Thank you for watching this episode of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.